we can start with advanced macroeconomics. So macroeconomics is a part of in the optional, it is part of paper 1, and in economic service it is part of general economics second paper by the heading theory of employment and output. So it is part of paper 1 in the optional and part of GE2 in the Indian economic service. So when we study the macroeconomics, first of all you have to go by the question paper. Question paper will determine the parameter. It will determine the syllabus actually. Because if you just see the syllabus part, what is written in the syllabus for optional in that, if you just see the syllabus for the macroeconomics, it simply says classical. Within classical what? So we have to read everything within classical. Then Keynesian, ISLM framework. That means open-ended kind of syllabus. Within classical Keynesian you can read, they can ask any question. Then neoclassical synthesis, neoclassical theories of interest rate determination. But nowhere it is written that it is also including inflation, unemployment, Phillips curve, Okun's law, design of monetary policy, but they are asking question regularly. So we will interpret the syllabus through question paper. So that question paper will give you an idea ki what are the content included in the syllabus of macroeconomics. So if you see the question paper of macroeconomics, first of all it will give you an idea about the weightage of this topic. So if you see the question of 2025, 1 question, 2 question, 3 question, 4 question, 5 question. Now 5 question means 60-70 marks का weightage हो गया. Some question may be of 10 marks, some question 15 marks, some question of 20 marks. So a weightage of about 60 to 70 plus marks will be for the macroeconomics, plus the nature of question is like interpret the slope of IS curve. What is the slope of IS curve? So you must know the slope of IS curve. What is the meaning of the classical dichotomy? It will become clear in the first class itself. Is it same as the neutrality of money? What are the determinants of velocity of money? Define liquidity trap. So there are some regular question in this macroeconomics. Liquidity trap, crowding out, these are regular questions. Effectiveness of monetary policy, fiscal policy, concept of IS curve, concept of LM curve. But similarly you have to go by the question for the economic service also under the heading theory of employment and the output. Now first thing in this section is that when we start the macroeconomics, just understand that this entire macroeconomics is broadly divided into 2 parts. Entire macroeconomics is broadly divided into 2 parts. One part of the macroeconomics, which is traditional economics, collectively called as classical. So classical follow certain basic principles. They have their own assumption. So they have their own conclusion also. So they follow a certain set of principles. So first we have to understand what is the argument provided by the classical. What are the assumptions followed by the classical. So there are many economists in the classical, but collectively you are calling them classical economics. The alternate thought given by Keynes and their follower referred as the Keynesian economics. So their follower referred as Keynesian economics. So they follow different set of principles. Their assumptions are different, so their conclusion will be different. ठीक है, right now don't try to be judging कि which one is better. ठीक है, वो उस मोड में सोचना ही नहीं है. First of all, just think what they are saying. Then we can identify कि what is the drawback and in what way the other thought is better or improved version. It is basically a debate between the classical and the Keynesian. So before Keynes, that is before 1936, there was only classical. Great Depression and after that emergence of Keynes. 1960s का जो decade है, 1960s के decade में the old classical modified themselves. And why they need to modify? Because Keynes countered classical. तो एक thought classical आया, उसके counter में तो जो क्लासिकल थे उन्होंने अपने आप को डिफेंड किया है बाई मॉडिफाइंग देयर ओन आर्गुमेंट. नाउ दे आर नोन एज द न्यू क्लासिकल. Neoclassical, you can call them new or neoclassical. Then later on some economists modified Keynesian argument. They will be known as the post-Keynesian or neo-Keynesian. Some talk about the synthesis of both also, taking the merit of classical, also taking the merit of Keynesian as well. So when we study the classical and Keynesian approach, it is basically, we can say, concept will evolve over a period of time. All thoughts are not given at same point of time. 1930s and before classical, 30s, 40s, 50s का जो decade है, that is dominated by Keynesian thought. 60s, late 60s के बाद dominated by the neoclassical, then countered by the neo or post-Keynesian. So when we study the classical principle first, one question has been asked that what is the main difference between the classical and Keynesian? Now if you just see that question, difference between the classical and the Keynesian, like this type of question can be created. Question number 17. Explain the major difference between classical and the Keynesian macroeconomics. Now ये question direct and it was asked as a compulsory question. For a 10 marker what you will be writing. So there are in fact many differences between classical and Keynesian. There are many differences between the classical and Keynesian. So what are the core difference between the classical and Keynesian? The core is that when we study the classical approach or classical model explain economy in a long run perspective, and Keynesian economics explain economy in a short run perspective. Long run description of economy, short run description of economy. Like for example, if I write y, that is y, whenever I write y here, capital Y, it stands for GDP. Mind में रखिएगा GDP लिख रहे हैं. So y is a function of capital, labor, technology and so on. Y is a function of capital, labor, technology and so on. If I ask why GDP of India in 2025-26 is more than what it used to be in 1951, so why we are able to produce more output now? Why we are able to produce more output? We are able to produce more output mainly because we have more resources, we have more plant and machinery, we have skilled labor, technology has improved over a period of time. So basically you are referring to this argument. But if I say that the Y growth rate of India in 2025-26 is lower as compared to what it was in 24-25, growth rate is lower, but why? Naturally the stock of capital has not decreased, the labor force has not decreased, the technology has not depreciated. So what could be the reason for the slowdown? You can say the reason for slowdown is that there is low demand in the economy, lack of demand है. Production की capacity तो बनी हुई है, but economy में demand कम है. So when you say demand is less, therefore production less, that means I am writing y is a function of aggregate demand. In macro you write that also, in macro you write this also, both are correct. So when I write y is equal to AD, when you write y equal to AD, you are actually following Keynesian approach. When I write y is a function of capital and labor, I follow classical approach. But now just see that example. I ask 2025-26 the GDP is more as compared to what it was in 1951. So you are comparing 1951 to 25-26. It is basically a long run description of economy. When I comparing the GDP growth rate of 25-26 with 24-25, it is basically short run approach. So in the short run you will find Keynesian correct, and in the long run you will find classical correct. Both are correct, but in their own way. Classical approach you will find most of the classical argument valid in long run, and most of the Keynesian argument valid in the short run. So one is short run description, other is long run description. Now when we make the other differences between the classical and Keynesian, the other differences between classical and Keynesian, अभी just से rough order में इसी format में लिखेंगे, just एक tabular format में, then I will give you the formal dictation, but just write down the major points because there are in fact many. So one major difference between classical and Keynesian is what? One major difference between classical and Keynesian is regarding their approach. long run description and short run description of the economy. Long run description and short run description of the economy. That means in the लिखना नहीं, in classical के accordingly output is a function of what? Capital and labor, and in the according to the Keynesian, output is a function of aggregate demand. The second difference is that when we explain the classical and Keynesian, that classical model always believed in full employment. Classical model believed in full employment. And what is the meaning of the term full employment? When I say full employment is in the labor market, what does it mean?
Everyone willing to work is getting work.
Everyone who is willing to work at the market wage rate, they are getting job. It simply means, it does not mean that everyone is employed. It simply means that demand is equal to supply. Full employment simply imply that labor demand is equal to labor supply. Supply of labor is equal to demand for labor. Supply of labor is equal to demand for labor, and that will determine the wage. And why full employment is always guaranteed? Full employment is guaranteed due to flexibility of wage. Flexibility of wage. Full employment guaranteed by flexibility of wage. It means if labor demand is more than labor supply, in that case wage will increase because of more demand for labor, and if supply is more, then wage will fall. So if labor demand and labor supply are not equal, then wage will adjust, and it will adjust immediately, so that demand is always equal to supply. Market will always clear in classical approach. Classical approach में market will always clear. But contrary to that, when we talk about the Keynesian economics say that economy is characterized by not full employment but by unemployment. Economy is characterized by unemployment. Economy is characterized by unemployment. Now unemployment means labor demand is less and supply is more. Labor demand is less but supply of the labor is more. But अगर ये कंडीशन होता है, लेबर सप्लाई ज़्यादा होगी, तो क्लासिकल में क्या होता है? वेज कम हो जाएगा. बट केन्स कहता है कि वेजेस आर रिजिड, they are not flexible. And what makes wages rigid? Why wages are rigid in the market? Government has set a minimum wage law. Wages cannot fall below that. There is presence of labor union. Union will not allow wages to fall below that. So there are some reasons that explain why wages are rigid, and due to rigid wage there is unemployment. Due to rigid wage there is unemployment. So unemployment arises due to rigidity of wage. वेज की रिजिडिटी है, मतलब अगर आप लेबर डिमांड और लेबर सप्लाई बना रहे हैं, then labor market will not clear here. That means it is not necessary that wage will be equal to this number. Wages can be higher like this, but at that high wage rate it is rigid. Supply of labor is more, demand for labor is less, we have unemployment. But despite unemployment, wage will not fall because set by government minimum wage, set by the labor union, set by the efficiency wage theory. So certain reasons has been explained or provided by the Keynesian to explain why wages are rigid. तो second major difference है that classical model क्या assume कर रहे हैं? Because of और Keynesian में due to rigidity of wage. ठीक है, both have provided their own reason. So whenever you study any model, follow their assumption. If you are studying classical model, follow classical assumption. If you are studying Keynesian model, follow Keynesian assumption. For each model will be consistent only when you follow their assumptions. Another difference between classical and Keynesian is that The classical concept is based upon the fact that supply creates its own demand. Supply creates its own demand. It is a Say's law. Supply creates its own demand. Classical model believe that supply creates its own demand. Now just think of what is the logic and reasoning behind it. Why classical believe in that supply will create its own demand? That means if you supply a product, demand for that product is generated. In what way? The reason provided by classical economists is that if you produce any particular product, suppose good X has been produced, in order to produce that product, we will be requiring labor, land, capital, entrepreneur. To labor you will pay wage, to land you will pay rent, capital owner will get interest, entrepreneur will get profit. So production generates income. Income for whom? Income for the factors of production. तो जितने का production होगा उतनी की value generate हो जाएगी, money income, and that money will always be spent. Spent on what? Spent on the commodity produced. तो जिस product का supply होगा, production supply will generate income and income will be spent. So in that way supply creates its own demand. Now question is, if that argument is correct, can we explain the Great Depression? What happened between 1929 to 1939? One entire decade. Depression is a case of lack of demand or lack of supply? Lack of demand है वो, supply तो available है, but there was lack of demand. That means there is something fundamentally wrong about this his law. It says that supply creates its own demand, but supply will not always create its own demand. So that was countered or provided by depression, was explained by the Keynesian. So Keynesian argument made, we do not say that supply creates its own demand. Now the reason why classical believed in this concept, that why supply will create its own demand, is that once income will be generated in terms of money, that money will be spent, because classical believed that money perform only one role, and that is to act as medium of exchange. Money के और भी रोल है, but classical ने क्या believe कर रखा है? Classical believe that money perform only one role, and that is to act as medium of exchange, which means demand for money has only one part. We keep money only because of transaction purpose. Classical thought है ये. We are holding money because money helps in buying goods. That is, money is helping in making transaction. So money demand has only one component, that is transaction demand for money. केन्स ने कंसेप्ट को मॉडिफाई किया. केन्स का कहना है कि मनी परफॉर्म द रोल ऑफ मीडियम ऑफ एक्सचेंज एज वेल एज store of value. It also act as store of value. So it is acting as medium of exchange plus a store of value. That means we, in terms of money, we can store the value. What is the meaning of that? Money के टर्म में कैसे स्टोर करते हैं वैल्यू को? मनी के टर्म में स्टोर कैसे करते हैं वैल्यू को? किसी एसेट के वैल्यू को हमने मनी के टर्म में स्टोर कर लिया. What is the meaning of that? जैसे take an example, if you are expecting that the share market will fall and you are holding some share, और लगता है कि शेयर का प्राइस घटने वाला है, then what you will do? Sell it. But if you are selling it, then what you get? Money. और जब वैल्यू घट जाएगी तो दोबारा हम बाई कर लेंगे. तो पॉइंट है, जब शेयर का प्राइस चेंज हो रहा था तो हमने अपने पास क्या रखा था? शेयर रखा था या मनी रखा था? मनी रखा. तो मनी के टर्म ने हमने वैल्यू को क्या किया है? स्टोर किया. दैट इज द स्टोरेज फंक्शन. By adding that, Keynes suggested that demand for money will have transaction demand as well as speculative demand for money. Money demand के फिर दो component हो जाएंगे, transaction and speculation. Classical के accordingly money perform only one role, and that is to act as medium of exchange. Money is held only for transaction purpose. Keynes में money is held for transaction purpose as well as for speculative purpose, as well as for the speculative purpose. So it is acting as a medium of exchange and store of value. medium of exchange as well as storage. Just I am giving you a hint कि what are the differences between the classical and Keynesian. ये सारे पॉइंट आपको काफ़ी डिटेल में पढ़ने हैं. Now when we move further from this point between classical and Keynesian, classical, one more important argument given by the classical is that output is determined by supply side. Output is determined by supply side. Classical concept का core output get determined by the supply side. It means aggregate supply line is vertical line. Okay, we will derive this in this class. So when you write P and Y, aggregate supply line is a vertical line, which also imply that no matter where you draw aggregate demand, the output will remain. अगर मैंने vertical line बना रखी है, so if I draw the aggregate demand here or above it or below it, in all case the output will remain same. So output is determined by supply side, not by the demand. What is the role of demand then? The role of demand will be to determine the price for that output. Depending upon the demand, you determine the price. Output get determined by supply side, not by the demand. But when we talk about the Keynesian argument, Keynes के argument में कहते हैं output is determined by demand side. Output is determined by demand side. So if you have an AS line, now if you draw the aggregate demand, that AD will determine the output. Position of AD. So if AD will increase, output will increase. Keynes के concept में Y की value AD से affect हो रही है, because Keynesian argument says Y is equal to AD. What determine output? Output get determined by demand. So if you shift demand, there will be more production. But Keynes भी ये नहीं कह रहा है कि इसे हम infinitely बढ़ा सकते हैं. Keynes का अगर आउटपुट इंक्रीज होगा तो यहाँ जो Y लिखा है मैंने, ये YF नहीं है, फुल एम्प्लॉयमेंट नहीं है, ये अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट है. सो इफ़ यू इंक्रीज आउटपुट फ्रॉम Y1 टू Y2, Y2 टू Y3, कब तक बढ़ेगा ये? वंस यू रीच full employment, then it will become vertical line. So once you reach the full employment, then it will become a vertical line. That means the classical is correct when they say that economy's output is determined by the full employment in the labor market. Output determined by the supply side, and here output determined by the demand side. Then another difference between classical and Keynesian is that when we talk about the classical, it is always based upon two important principles. One is known as classical dichotomy. Classical dichotomy. What is the meaning of the term dichotomy? Classical dichotomy. The dichotomy means separation. Separation between nominal variable and real variable. In economics, there are many nominal variables and there are some real variables. So what is the difference between nominal and real? If I say nominal wage, real wage. Nominal exchange rate, real exchange rate. Nominal interest rate, real interest rate. Nominal money supply, real money supply. Fundamental difference क्या होता है nominal और real का? बेसिक डिफरेंस बिटवीन नॉमिनल, किस वेरिएबल को अगर मैं नॉमिनल कह रहा हूँ, किसी को रियल कह रहा हूँ, तो व्हाट इज द बेसिक डिफरेंस बिटवीन दिस टू? नॉमिनल विल ऑलवेज बी इन मॉनेटरी टर्म, रियल विल ऑलवेज बी इन फिजिकल टर्म. नॉमिनल इन मॉनेटरी टर्म, रियल इन फिजिकल टर्म. नॉमिनल इन मॉनेटरी टर्म, रियल इन फिजिकल टर्म. दिस पेन इज रियल, फिजिकल है ये. प्राइस ऑफ दिस पेन नॉमिनल हो गया. प्राइस ऑफ दिस पेन इज नॉमिनल. तो इफ आई से दैट आई एम कीपिंग दैट मच ऑफ मनी सो दैट आई कैन बाय दिस पेन, So how much money I will hold? I am saying I am keeping that much of money so that I can buy this pen. So how much money I am holding? Depend upon the price. If price is 100 I will keep 100, if price is 200 I will keep. तो वो जो 100 और 200 चेंज हो रहा है, ये क्या चेंज हो रहा है? नॉमिनल है, वो रियल तो एक ही है. So when you say the nominal wage, if a worker is getting a nominal wage of rupees 100 per hour, what is the real wage? What is the meaning of real wage then? वर्कर को आपने एक दिन वर्क करने के लिए 1000 या 100 रुपये दिए. What is the real meaning of that real wage? Real wage means how much goods he can buy with that 100 rupees. That will become the real goods. Physical हो जाएगा. So how much goods you can buy with 100 rupees? That depend upon the price. That depend upon the price. So if I divide that wage with price, it will become real. Suppose price is 100. Wage is 100 rupees per hour. Price of petrol is 100 rupees. So you can buy 1 liter. If the price becomes 200, then you can buy half liter. तो हमने वेज को किससे डिवाइड किया? प्राइस से डिवाइड कर दिया. दैट विल बिकम अ रियल कंसेप्ट. ठीक है. क्लासिकल कंसेप्ट कह रहे हैं कि नॉमिनल और रियल सेपरेट है. इसका मतलब है नॉमिनल में चेंज होने पे रियल पे कोई इफेक्ट नहीं पड़ेगा. नॉमिनल विल चेंज बिकॉज ऑफ नॉमिनल, रियल विल चेंज बिकॉज ऑफ रियल. रियल विल नॉट चेंज बिकॉज ऑफ नॉमिनल. Nominal will change because of nominal, real will change because of real, real will not change because of nominal. Nominal change होने से real पे effect नहीं पड़ेगा. Nominal change होने पे real पे effect नहीं पड़ना. So money is a nominal variable. Money is a nominal variable. Money itself monetary है वो तो. Money is a nominal variable. So if you increase money, it will affect other nominal like price, other nominal like nominal wage. What will not change is real. Real means M by P, that will not change. W by P, that will not change. Output of economy not change. Employment not change. क्यों नहीं होगा वही एक्सप्लेन करना है हमें, मॉडल में ये पढ़ना है. मीनिंग क्लियर हो रहा है? व्हाट इज द मीनिंग ऑफ द टर्म क्लासिकल डायकोटमी? सेपरेशन बिटवीन नॉमिनल एंड रियल. और क्लासिकल मॉडल ऑल्सो बिलीव दैट मनी इज न्यूट्रल. मनी इज न्यूट्रल. न्यूट्रलिटी ऑफ मनी. व्हाट इज द मीनिंग ऑफ द टर्म व्हेन वी से मनी इज न्यूट्रल? मनी न्यूट्रलिटी का मतलब होता है मनी बीइंग अ नॉमिनल वेरिएबल विल नॉट अफेक्ट एनी रियल वेरिएबल. वो न्यूट्रल है इकॉनमी के लिए. उसका रियल आउटपुट पे कोई इफेक्ट, क्योंकि मनी इटसेल्फ इज अ नॉमिनल वेरिएबल एंड चेंज इन द नॉमिनल विल नॉट अफेक्ट एनी रियल. सो चेंज इन द मनी सप्लाई विल नॉट अफेक्ट GDP. सो इफ मनी इज न्यूट्रल, मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी इज नॉट इफेक्टिव. देन क्लासिकल कंसेप्ट तो लेजर फेयर चलता है. लीस्ट इंटरफेरेंस फ्रॉम द गवर्नमेंट साइड. Government policy has no effect on the economy. Keynes do not agree with that. Keynes का कहना है कि we can use money supply in order to affect output. Money is not neutral as per Keynes. Dichotomy does not exist as per the Keynes. But again I repeat, all Keynesian argument is valid in short run. So in the short run, money is not neutral. In the short run there is no dichotomy. But in the long run, there is. लॉन्ग रन का कंसेप्ट क्लासिकल कंसेप्ट है. तो ये आर्गुमेंट इनफैक्ट आपको ये डिफरेंसेस आंसर के फॉर्मेट में वहाँ लिखने हैं. ठीक है. तो 10 मार्क्स में ऑब्वियसली यू हैव बोथ साइड ऑफ द पेज एंड यू हैव टू राइट द आंसर फॉर दिस क्वेश्चन. एक्सप्लेन द मेजर डिफरेंस बिटवीन क्लासिकल एंड द केनेशियन एंड ऑलवेज कीप द क्लासिकल कंसेप्ट एंड द केनेशियन कंसेप्ट इन माइंड. जब कभी आप ऐसा कंसेप्ट लिख रहे हैं, मतलब व्हेन यू आर रीडिंग द क्लासिकल, then all classical concept must come. That means when we studying the classical concept, it means what? मैंने कहा classical, that means it is a long run description. Output determined by the capital, labor, technology. Economy is characterized by due to flexibility of wage. Supply creates its own demand. Money demanded for transaction purpose money acting as a role of medium of exchange. Aggregate supply line is a vertical line, output determined by the supply side, demand will determine only the price, not the output. There is dichotomy between the real variable and the nominal variable because money is neutral. So these points must come whenever you are reading the classical approach. So first write on the differences, not in the tabular form. Now write it a paragraph form, in the sense we will take one point and one paragraph, next point and next paragraph. ठीक है, बेटर होगा उस फॉर्मेट में. टेबुलर फॉर्म में नहीं करना, टेबुलर वो समझने के लिए ठीक है, बट नाउ यू विल राइट इन द पैराग्राफ. For every point there will be one, so about 7-8 short paragraph will be there. Write first paragraph. Classical macroeconomics is a long run description of economy. Classical macroeconomics is a long run description of economy. Classical macroeconomics is a long run description of economy. Long run description of economy. After comma, whereas Keynesian economics is short run description of economy. Keynesian economics is short run description of economy. Keynesian economics is short run description of economy. Next paragraph. Classical economics assume that there is always full employment in labor market. There is always full employment in labor market. Classical economics assume that there is always full employment in labor market. There is always full employment in labor market, and it is guaranteed by flexibility of wage. And it is guaranteed by flexibility of wage. I repeat, classical economics assume that there is always full employment in labor market and it is guaranteed by flexibility of wage. Just underline the key word full employment and flexibility of wage. Full employment and flexibility of wage. Yes. Full employment means that labor market is always in equilibrium. Full employment means that labor market is always in equilibrium. Full employment means that labor market is always in equilibrium. And in case of inequality between labor demand and labor supply, in case of inequality between labor demand and labor supply, wage will adjust immediately. Wage will adjust immediately. Wage will adjust immediately. Wage will adjust immediately. Full stop. In contrast, same paragraph में, in contrast, Keynesian economics assume that, Keynesian economics assume that there is unemployment in labor market. Keynesian economics assume that there is unemployment in labor market due to rigidity of wage. Unemployment in labor market due to rigidity of wage. Underline unemployment and rigidity of wage. Due to rigidity of wage. wages are rigid due to wages are rigid due to wages are rigid due to government minimum wage law. Wages are rigid due to government minimum wage law, government minimum wage law, and presence of labor union, and presence of labor union. Government minimum wage law and presence of labor union. Next paragraph. Next paragraph. Classical economics is based on classical economics is based on classical economics is based on Say's law. Classical economics is based on Say's law. Just underline Say's law. Is based on Say's law, which states that supply creates its own demand. Which states that supply creates its own demand. Supply creates its own demand. ठीक है, यहाँ पे आपको elaborate नहीं करना है कि how it will create, just use the keywords because you are just highlighting the difference between the classical and the Keynesian. However, Keynes argued that there could be overproduction. Keynes argued that there could be overproduction. There could be overproduction and deficiency in demand. Deficiency in demand. There could be overproduction and deficiency in demand. Next paragraph. In classical economics, output is determined from supply side. In classical economics, output is determined from supply side. In classical economics, output is determined from supply side. Output is determined from supply side, and the role of AD, role of aggregate demand, and the role of AD is to determine price for that output. And the role of AD is to determine price for that output. Price for that output. Underline that. Output is determined from supply side, and role of AD is to determine price for that output. Role of AD is to determine price for that output. Full stop. However, in the Keynesian model, output is determined by aggregate demand. In Keynesian model, output is determined by aggregate demand. In Keynesian model, output is determined by aggregate demand. After comma, it means that in response of more demand for output, in response of more demand for output, there will be more production. In response of more demand for output, there will be more production and more output. Next paragraph. Horizontal. Next paragraph. Classical economics assume that money is demanded only for transaction purpose. Classical economists assume that money is demanded only for transaction purpose. Money is demanded only for transaction purpose. Underline that. Money is demanded only for transaction purpose. Classical economists assume that money is demanded only for transaction purpose because money performs only one role. Because money performs only one role. Money performs only one role. That is, money performs only one role, that is to act as medium of exchange. That is to act as medium of exchange. That is to act as medium of exchange. Full stop. However, in the Keynesian model, money is demanded. In the Keynesian model, money is demanded. In the Keynesian model, money is demanded for transaction purpose as well as speculative purpose. Transaction purpose as well as speculative purpose. Underline that. Transaction purpose as well as speculative purpose. We will elaborate what is the meaning of speculation. Transaction and speculative purpose. This is because money act as medium of exchange. Money act as medium of exchange as well as store of value. Money act as medium of exchange as well as store of value. Store of value. Next paragraph. Classical economics is based on classical dichotomy. Classical economics is based on classical dichotomy. Underline the word classical dichotomy. Classical economics is based on classical dichotomy and monetary neutrality. Classical dichotomy and monetary neutrality. Underline both classical dichotomy and monetary neutrality. Full stop. According to classical dichotomy, there is theoretical separation between. According to classical dichotomy, there is theoretical separation between. Nominal variables and real variables. Nominal variables and real variables. I repeat, according to classical dichotomy, there is theoretical separation between nominal variable and real variables. So it arises due to monetary neutrality. It arises due to monetary neutrality. Which means money being a nominal variable. Money being a nominal variable will not affect will not affect any real variable. Money being a nominal variable will not affect any real variable. Real like employment output, real variable. So, but in the Keynesian model, changes in money can affect real variables. But in the Keynesian model, changes in money can affect real variables. Changes in money can affect real variables like output and employment in short run. Like output and employment in short run. Output and employment in short run. Next paragraph. Policy implication of classical model is that neither monetary policy nor fiscal policy can affect output. Neither monetary policy nor fiscal policy can affect output. Neither monetary policy nor fiscal policy can affect output. Because output is determined mainly by inputs. Input matlab labor, capital and so on. Output is determined mainly by input. But in the Keynesian model, both fiscal and monetary policy can be used. Both fiscal and monetary policy can be used to affect output. केन्स के मॉडल में पॉलिसी इफेक्टिव है, क्लासिकल मॉडल में पॉलिसी इफेक्टिव नहीं है. सो व्हेन यू आर आंसरिंग दिस क्वेश्चन, आप पेपर के अंदर रखिएगा, बुक में डायरेक्टली किसी जगह पे आपको ये डिफरेंस एस फॉर्मेट में लिखा हुआ नहीं मिलता. यू आर रीडिंग क्लासिकल सेपरेट, केनेशियन सेपरेट, बट द क्वेश्चन वाज पॉइंट आउट द डिफरेंस बिटवीन द क्लासिकल एंड द केनेशियन. फॉर 10 मार्कर यू हैव लेस देन 10 मिनट. ये कंपल्सरी क्वेश्चन में यू हैव हार्डली 7 to 8 मिनट टू राइट. 7 to 8 मिनट में आपको ये सारे कंटेंट जो लिखे हैं ये लिखने हैं, बट वो इसी ऑर्डर में आ जाए, इसी सेंटेंस में आ जाए, पॉइंट्स मिस आउट ना करो. दैट मीन्स इन ऑर्डर टू गेट लेटेस्ट 6 or 6.5 out of 10 यू हैव टू राइट द सेम. ठीक है, तो अबाउट कंपल्सरी में यू नीड एन आंसर ऑफ अबाउट 150 वर्ड्स. तो अबाउट 150 वर्ड मीन्स अबाउट 7-8 शॉर्ट पैराग्राफ है, तो वो शॉर्ट मोर देन दैट यू हैव रिटन. ठीक है, तो कोशिश करना है कि इसको दोबारा एक बार आप लिखो सो दैट वो याद हो जाए. ठीक है, सो नाउ वी हैव डन ओनली द मेजर डिफरेंस बिटवीन द क्लासिकल एंड द केनेशियन. जस्ट वो क्वेश्चन मेंशन कर लीजिएगा. दिस इज क्वेश्चन ऑफ 2023 में ऑप्शनल के अंदर है. और डायकॉटमी का क्वेश्चन जो है ना, ये कई बार है. इनफैक्ट डायकॉटमी का क्वेश्चन अगर आप देख रहे हैं तो डायकॉटमी का क्वेश्चन एक व्हाट इज़ क्लासिकल डायकॉटमी अभी एक्सप्लेन होगा फॉर्मल वे. मोर डिटेल इज रिक्वायर्ड. जस्ट यू हैव रिटन द बेसिक पॉइंट कि व्हाट इज डायकॉटमी एंड व्हाट इज न्यूट्रलिटी ऑफ मनी. देन full employment is the logical conclusion of the classical macroeconomics model. Money is neutral. ठीक है, न्यूट्रलिटी ऑफ मनी का कंसेप्ट है क्लासिकल डायकोटमी. व्हाई द कंसेप्ट ऑफ डायकोटमी एंड न्यूट्रलिटी सो इंपॉर्टेंट इन द क्लासिकल फुल एम्प्लॉयमेंट मॉडल. ये इकोनॉमिक सर्विस का क्वेश्चन है, क्वेश्चन नंबर 16. Concept of dichotomy and neutrality is so important. Then not only 1 year, ये in fact question already repeated. Explain the neutrality of money. Question number 10 2022 का क्वेश्चन पढ़ लो. Concept of dichotomy and neutrality of money in the classical, neoclassical and the Keynesian. And this also neutrality of money is so important in the classical model. This question was 16. So regularly asked question है, but when the question comes directly on the classical dichotomy or the neutrality of money, then mainly you apply the classical model tools to explain this. So right now what we have to cover, we will be covering the classical model first and then we will go to the Keynesian model. But when we say classical model, see, when you are studying the classical macroeconomics model, that classical macroeconomics model has in fact 3 tools. इसके 3 पार्ट हैं. One is classical aggregate supply curve. This has been explained in chapter number 3, Freud. That chapter number 3 complete chapter is explaining why classical aggregate supply curve is a vertical line. इसका derivation है, मतलब output determined by supply side. So for that purpose you have to derive the supply curve. So why this line is a vertical line, that has been explained in the complete we can say chapter. But that chapter provide you one tool of classical model. The model means model will have different tools to explain that conclusion. So first we explain the classical AS, then we will derive classical aggregate demand. Second part will be this. First the classical aggregate supply curve, then classical aggregate demand curve. And classical aggregate demand curve, when we draw this, it will be classical AD. That classical AD will be a rectangular hyperbola shape. Why it will be rectangular hyperbola, we will explain that. So first we have to derive the AS, then we derive, if you combine these two, when you combine these two, that means you get the AS and AD intersection. In that case we determine the output also as well as the price. Third tool is classical theory of interest. Classical theory of rate of interest. Classical theory of rate of interest is explained by loanable fund theory. Loanable fund theory. Classical theory of interest is explained by loanable fund theory, which means supply and demand for loanable fund will determine the rate of interest. So what are the major macroeconomic variables? Economic major, when you say major macroeconomic variables, so what are the major macroeconomic variables? Major variables like GDP, price level, because that will determine the inflation. When we say inflation is there, that means what? It is not price of one product, it is price of in general a basket of commodity. Other major macroeconomic variable is the rate of interest in the economy. Price, employment, output, rate of interest, these are major macroeconomic variables. So how they play their role in determining the output and price. So model will be explained by this. For that purpose we are taking 2 chapters, chapter number 3 for classical AS and then chapter number 4 again from Freud. Chapter number 4 will explain the remaining part. Remaining means classical AD as well as classical theory of rate of interest. So 2 chapters from the Freud. These 2 chapters are included in your macro spiral. Okay, but just focus on these two chapters. I think all question asked so far from the classical model you can answer from these two chapters, any question. ठीक है, कोई भी क्वेश्चन का नेचर है इससे सॉल्व हो जाएगा. तो योर फर्स्ट फोकस इज बेसिकली, सी फर्स्ट वी स्टडी द मॉडल, तो टूल्स पहले पढ़ लेंगे एंड देन वी कैन एक्सप्लेन द पॉलिसी implication. So once you are familiar with the tool, then you can understand the model. So right now we are focusing only on one part, and that one part is derivation of classical aggregate supply curve. So mainly it is chapter number 3, the classical AS. But if I ask कि what was before that, मतलब क्लासिकल से पहले कौन सी इकोनॉमिक्स थी. हमने स्टार्ट तो क्लासिकल सिलेबस के अकॉर्डिंगली कर लिया कि हमें क्लासिकल के निशान पढ़ना है. तो क्लासिकल से पहले की इकोनॉमिक्स क्या थी? क्लासिकल से पहले मर्केंटलिस्ट, मर्केंटलिस्ट से पहले भी इकोनॉमिक्स थी, वो फिजियोक्रेट्स थे. तो वो जो डिफरेंट स्कूल ऑफ थॉट है पुराने, वो सारे कंटेंट और सिलेबस हो जाएंगे इकोनॉमिक सर्विस में व्हेन यू स्टडी द इकोनॉमिक थॉट सेक्शन. ठीक है, वो सेपरेट आ जाएगा. बट ऑप्शन में हमें स्टार्ट कहाँ से करना है? क्लासिकल से बिगिन कर रहे हैं. वी आर स्टार्टिंग फ्रॉम द क्लासिकल, बट देयर वाज इकोनॉमिक प्रिंसिपल बिफोर द क्लासिकल ऑल्सो. फ्रॉइड में भी वो थोड़ा रेफरेंस गिवन है कि इट वाज द मर्केंटलिस्ट. सो मर्केंटलिस्ट बिलीव्ड इन बुलियनिज्म. बुलियनिज्म मीन्स द power of a nation is determined by the stock of precious metals you have. The country was supposed to be more powerful if that country has more stock of precious metals. And how you will acquire those precious metals? By putting restriction on import and promoting your export. Through export you will be getting the metal, and you are putting restriction on the import. That was the policy followed by the mercantilist before the classical. क्लासिकल ने फोकस शिफ्ट किया है टू ब्रिंग फोकस ऑन द रियल फैक्टर. उनका कहना है कि जो रियल फैक्टर होंगे दे विल डिटरमाइन दैट वेदर इकॉनमी और कंट्री इज मोर पावरफुल और नॉट द स्टॉक ऑफ मेटल्स. विद द स्टॉक ऑफ मेटल्स द कंट्री कैन बी रिच, बट इफ वी से दैट यूएस इज मोर पावरफुल मेनली बिकॉज साइज ऑफ द इकॉनमी, एंड साइज ऑफ द इकॉनमी इज डिटरमाइंड बाई GDP, and GDP is a real factor. So real factor, classical analysis is a real analysis. Classical analysis एक real analysis है. So that chapter basically begins with that part. Just उसे part में एक introduction में आप लिख लो note में. Not required for the answer, but just for information. Classical economics emerged. Classical economics emerged as a revolution against. Classical economics emerged as a revolution against. Classical economics emerged as a revolution against a body of economic principle. A body of economic principle. A body of economic principle known as mercantilism. Body of economic principle known as mercantilism. Underline the word mercantilism. The features of mercantilism were A. Bullianism. That is a belief that, just briefly one line, that is a belief that wealth and power of country is determined by its stock of precious metals. Wealth and power of country is determined by stock of precious metals. And second, the belief in the need for the belief in the need for state action, that is government action, the belief in the need for state action to direct the development of capitalist system, and how government can be formulating the laws in order to direct the development of the capitalist system by putting restriction on the import and allowing the exports. Next paragraph. In contrast to mercantilist, classical economists emphasize the importance of real factors, So they stress the optimizing tendency. Of free market. In the absence of state control. They stress the optimizing tendency of free market in the absence of state control. This line actually means that in the absence of state control, laissez-faire policy, least interference from the government side, market is free, it will optimize. That means firm will optimize their objective, they will maximize their profit, worker will maximize their utility, and market will be guided by the invisible hand, that is demand and supply. So Adam Smith is classical. So that is a classical thought. तो क्लासिकल थॉट ये कह रहा है कि मार्केट को रेगुलेट करने की ज़रूरत, मर्केंटलिस्ट में तो स्टेट एक्शन है, कंट्रोल है, क्लासिकल कहने की कंट्रोल की ज़रूरत नहीं है, वो अपने आप ऑप्टिमाइज कर जाएगा. इफ़ यू लीव द मार्केट फ्रीली इट विल ऑलवेज मैक्सिमाइज द वेलफेयर बिकॉज द मार्केट इटसेल्फ इज एफिशिएंट. नेक्स्ट पैराग्राफ. क्लासिकल एनालिसिस वाज एडम स्मिथ तो फादर है इकोनॉमिक्स, तो माइक्रो हो या मैक्रो. मेनली जब आप कैटेगराइज करोगे डिफरेंट इकोनॉमिक्स को, मैक्रो में कैटेगराइजेशन है, माइक्रो में इट इज़ नॉट कैटेगराइजेशन. कि ये क्लासिकल केनिशियन थॉट इज़ बेसिकली अ मैक्रो थॉट कि इकोनॉमी के बारे में क्या पर्सपेक्टिव है. तो जिनका पर्सपेक्टिव माइक्रो में है उनका पर्सपेक्टिव मैक्रो लेवल पे भी है. ओल्ड जो थिंकर थे वो डिसिप्लिन सेंट्रिक भी नहीं थे कि वो सिर्फ इकोनॉमिक्स ही पढ़ रहे हैं. उनके थॉट आप फिलॉसफी में मिल जाएगा, थॉट आपको सोशियोलॉजी में भी मिल जाएगा. रावलसिन थ्योरी यहाँ पढ़ेंगे, रावलसिन थ्योरी हम सोशियोलॉजी में भी पढ़ते हैं. तो वो तो ओरिजिनल थॉट है, दे आर नॉट स्टडिंग और दे आर नॉट प्रिपेयरिंग फॉर एनी एग्जामिनेशन. वो तो थॉट दे रहे हैं. क्लासिकल जो थॉट है उसको, और उस थॉट को हम अलग अलग जगह अप्लाई कर सकते हैं. तो इकोनॉमिक्स में भी अप्लाई हो जाएगा, इंटर डिसिप्लिनरी है, डिफरेंट डिसिप्लिन में यूज होंगे वो. नेक्स्ट क्लासिकल एनालिसिस वाज प्राइमरली a real analysis. Classical analysis was primarily a real analysis. Underline that word, a real analysis. So the growth of an economy was a result of The growth of an economy was the result of increased stock of factors of production, and advances in technology. Full stop. According to classical, money played a role only in helping transactions. It means money only act as medium of exchange. So now mainly we can begin this chapter for the derivation of AS. See, what is important is that when you read this chapter number 3, now if you are reading from the book, that book will be explaining one idea in a detailed manner. It will be taking different assumptions, tools and so on. If a chapter contains, let us say, about 20 pages, हमें जो आंसर लिखना है पेपर में वो 2 पेज का है, बट व्हाट इज एक्सपेक्टेड फ्रॉम यू कि 20 का कंटेंट इस 2 में आ जाए. You are reading the chapter, you are reading a book. Book is not written directly to, they are not writing directly answer, but you have to write an answer in a limited time and limited space. So out of this 20, you have to make a 2 page. So the purpose of this class will be basically to help you understand this and make concise in, let us say, 5 to 6 sides. And then from 5 to 6 side you will convert it into 2, because there will be some part which will be needed in order to explain something, not required for the answer writing. So we will be developing this chapter, explaining this chapter as explained in the book. So notebook में आपके पास 5-6 साइड के अंदर आ जाएगा और वहाँ से आपको बेसिकली 2 साइड का आंसर क्रिएट करना है. Now when we start this chapter, the chapter basically begins with production function. ठीक है, you can make short subheading. It starts with the production function concept. So what is the meaning of the term production function? Production is a function of what? Production is a function of, that is, production of the output is a function of the input. So I write in macroeconomics, I write Y, that is output, as a function of stock of capital, employment of labor denoted by N. It is also a function of technology. So there are many factors, but you write function as this: Y is a function of capital and employment of labor, where technology is constant and capital is also constant. Capital is constant, but first thing, when I say capital, which capital I am referring to? Macro में मैंने capital लिखा है. Which capital? Is it financial capital or real capital or both? यहाँ function में financial capital like bonds, shares, these are financial capital. Real capital like plant and machinery. So is it financial, real or both? It is only real. Classical is a real analysis. So it is focusing on the real factors. So this is real capital, not the financial capital. So these are basically real numbers. Real employment, real output. Now keeping capital constant, if you increase only labor, if I increase only labor, then 2 part of the diagram here, on axis I write here y as a function of n, y as a function of n, y as a function of n keeping capital constant. So keeping capital constant, if you increase only labor, then what happens? Micro में भी ये theory है. Keeping capital constant, if I increase only labor, initially production will rise at increasing rate, then production will rise at decreasing rate, and finally total product will start declining. But that is for one firm. But here we are not referring to one firm. So one firm may be having increasing return, other firm may be having decreasing return, economy may be having constant return also. If there is a constant return, then the line will be straight. So draw up to a point a straight line. And then due to diminishing return, the slope will be declining. Slope declining, not the line. So y as a function of n actually means that what will be the output, that depends upon what? How much will be the output, that depends upon employment. If I say that y is a function of n, employment, that means output depends upon n. Output will depend upon n. So this line basically simply shows that y is a function of capital and employment of labor, where capital is held. So based upon a particular number of n, there will be a given value of y. If you have a different value of n, there will be a different number of y. So y depends upon employment of labor. Y depends upon the employment of labor. See, we have how many variables are there in this equation? मतलब टर्म y है, k और n है. How many we have written on the axis? 2. So the third is constant. If that constant number will change, then if that constant number will change, तो ये फंक्शन शिफ्ट हो जाएगा. जिस वेरिएबल को आप एक्सेस पे लिखते हैं, अगर वो चेंज हो रहा है तो मूवमेंट है. मूवमेंट इन द सेंस, इफ आई से n1 की जगह n2 हो गया, तो आउटपुट y1 की जगह y2 हो जाएगा. ये मूवमेंट हो रहा है लाइन के ऊपर. बट इफ आई से कैपिटल को इंक्रीजेज और टेक्नोलॉजी इंप्रूव्स, देन सेम लेबर कैन प्रोड्यूस more output. Same labor can produce more output. So function can shift up or it can shift down. From this production function, I calculate the marginal productivity of labor. What is the meaning of the term marginal productivity? Marginal means what? Additional. So marginal product means additional product due to additional labor. So additional output due to additional employment, delta y by delta n. And whenever you do that dy by dx, because y axis पे y है और x axis पे n है, तो एक्चुअली ये डेरिवेटिव के फॉर्म में dy by dx हो गया, डेल्टा y by डेल्टा x. So you get slope. Slope of what? Slope of production function is marginal product. Slope of production function is marginal product. So if that function is a straight line का slope कांस्टेंट रहेगा, तो यहाँ पे लाइन कांस्टेंट बना लेंगे. जब तक ये लाइन स्ट्रेट है तब तक आप इसे कांस्टेंट ड्रॉ करोगे. एंड देन this curve is getting more and more flatter, which means if it is getting more flatter, that means slope is declining. Slope is declining. So since slope is declining, so you draw the MPN declining. That is marginal productivity of labor. Draw this as diagram number 1. From function we have derived the MPN. तो अगर function shift हो गया तो MPN भी शिफ्ट हो जाएगा. अगर फंक्शन शिफ्ट हो जाएगा तो ये कर्व भी शिफ्ट हो जाएगा. एंड फंक्शन कैन शिफ्ट बिकॉज ऑफ टेक्नोलॉजी चेंज, फंक्शन कैन शिफ्ट बिकॉज ऑफ कैपिटल चेंज, फंक्शन कैन शिफ्ट बिकॉज ऑफ प्रोडक्टिविटी चेंज. व्हाट इज द इम्पैक्ट ऑफ स्किल इंडिया प्रोग्राम ऑन प्रोडक्शन फंक्शन? सो स्किल विल improve productivity. So same labor can produce more output, so function will shift up. ठीक है, just right. अभी we are developing the tools. जिस tool को use करना है in order to make create an answer.
सर ये MPN और MPN
एक ही बात है. इसको बस फ्रॉइड ने एन से डिनोट कर रखा है, एन एम्प्लॉयमेंट के लिए यूज़ कर रहे हैं उसको. बाकी आप MPL लिखोगे कोई इशू नहीं. फंक्शन को आप K, L भी लिख सकते हैं, नो प्रॉब्लम विद दैट. यूज़ बट जो स्टैंडर्ड में यूज़ किया जा रहा है उसको आप बेटर कर. रेड downward sloping in the sense this slope is actually as employment will increase, production is increasing at a decreasing rate, therefore marginal product is declining. Right. Production function summarizes the relationship between production function summarizes the relationship between production function summarizes the relationship between total input and total output. Production function summarizes the relationship between total input and total output. Total input and total output. After comma, assuming a given technology. Assuming a given technology. Full stop. The short run production function is a technical relationship. The short run production function is a technical relationship that determines the level of output, given the labor input, that determines the level of output given the labor input. Full stop. We must note that production function can shift up. Due to improvement in technology. Production function can shift up due to improvement in technology or increase in stock of capital. So from this production function, we derive MPN, marginal product of labor. From this production function we derive MPN, which is slope of production function. So this is just a relationship between the input and the output. So this line basically simply say that whatever will the output, that depend upon the employment of labor. So if employment is N1, then output will be Y1. If employment is N2, then output will be. So now next question is what determines the employment? Because employment will determine output. So what determines the employment? In the market? Employment in the market will be determined by two sides. Labor demand and labor supply. Demand and supply की equality होगी, that will determine the employment. So when we talk about the employment, yes, first understand this point. When we determine the employment in the labor market, employment means you are referring to this N. Clear? Now employment will be determined by demand for labor and supply of labor. demand for labor and supply of labor. That means you have written y as a function of capital which is held constant and employment of labor. And now we are determining that this n is determined by two things. That n is determined by labor demand and labor supply. Now just the model, basically the classical model believe that market is perfectly competitive. The classical model believe that market is perfectly free market hai. Market is perfectly competitive. Now what are the features of a perfect competition market? When I say market is perfectly competitive hai, so what is the feature of perfect competition market? Large number of producer and seller. All are producing homogeneous product. उस homogeneous product को आप y से denote कर रहे हो. Each firms are price taker. When I say firms are price taker, that means price of the product is constant for one firm. So when price is constant, then marginal revenue will be equal to that. P और MR की वैल्यू बराबर होगी. So assuming market to be perfectly competitive, how much labor will be demanded? Now answer on one side first. Who is demanding labor? Labor will be demanded by firms. How much labor they will demand? Market competitive F, optimizing behavior of the economic agent. Firms will try to maximize their own profit. Worker will try to maximize their own utility. So how much labor they will demand? They will demand that much of labor where their own profit get maximized. And what is profit maximizing condition? Profit maximizing condition is that marginal revenue must be equal to marginal cost. Marginal revenue must be equal to marginal cost. Then only the profit will get maximized. Assuming market to be perfectly competitive, MR is equal to what? Price. So in place of MR I can write price. Clear? In place of MR I can write price. Now come to this question. What is the meaning of marginal cost? Addition to cost due to additional unit of output produced. Addition to cost due to additional unit of output produced. How you can produce additional output? If the function is this, how we can produce additional output? We can produce additional output only by employing additional labor, because capital तो constant है. Capital is fixed, technology is fixed. So we can produce more of the output only by employing more labor. Now as you employ more of labor, you have to pay wage to that labor. But again wage sector में भी वो firms price taker होंगे. Now if I say that the worker is being paid a wage of, workers को जो wage दिया जा रहा है वो 100 rupees per hour है. Worker paid a wage of 100 rupees per hour. So what is the marginal cost? Marginal cost of additional output होता है, मतलब cost of one additional unit of output produced. So if you are employing one additional labor 1 hour, you are paying how much wage? क्या ये जरूरी है कि वर्कर ने एक एडिशनल आवर में एक ही यूनिट प्रोड्यूस किया होगा? वर्कर में प्रोड्यूस मोर देन दैट, मे प्रोड्यूस लेस देन दैट ऑल्सो. सपोज अगर एक किया है तो पूरा का पूरा 100 का कॉस्ट हो गया एडिशनल मेरा एक एडिशनल यूनिट के लिए. बट इफ वर्कर हैज प्रोड्यूस 2 यूनिट इन 1 आवर, देन तो पर यूनिट का कॉस्ट 50 हो जाएगा. 4 यूनिट है तो 25 हो जाएगा. तो बेसिकली व्हाट यू आर डूइंग टू कैलकुलेट द मार्जिनल कॉस्ट इज दैट you are dividing this wage with marginal product of labor. Whatever output you produce in 1 hour is called marginal product. तो अगर वो 1 है तो 100 by 1, 2 है तो 100 by 2, 3 है तो 100 by 3, 4 है तो 100 by 4 किया. तो मुझे इस नंबर से कोई मतलब नहीं है. हमने वेज कैलकुलेट किया और वेज को किससे डिवाइड कर दिया? MP N से डिवाइड कर दिया. ये नंबर कुछ भी हो सकता है. Then it is called marginal cost. I repeat, marginal cost means addition to the cost due to additional output produced. To produce additional output we require additional labor, but one additional labor may produce more than one output, may produce less. So addition to the cost will be wage divided by MPN. Can I write this equation as W by P equal to MPN, W by P equal to N MPN. What is W by P now? Real wage. So worker real wage must be equal to MPN. Worker real wage must be equal to MPN. Worker real wage must be equal to MPN. Then only the profit will get maximized. So if I draw the MPN curve, this is the MPN curve. If I say that the real wage is W1 by P1, then how much labor will be demanded by the firm? Firm will always demand how much labor, where their profit get. And what is the profit maximizing condition? W by P must be equal to what? MPN. So this W by P must be equal to MPN. Their equality will be there only at this point. So in that case, employment of labor will be N1, demand for labor rather. If W by P is a lower number, then if W by P is a lower number, suppose if it is W naught by P1, a lower value is there, then profit maximizing condition will be satisfied here now. In that case, demand for labor will be N2. So demand for labor will be drawn by connecting these points. And if you connect all those dots, it will coincide with which curve? MPN. So MPN curve itself is called labor demand curve. ये MPN curve ही labor demand curve है. So we say that labor demand is a function of, it is a function of real wage, and it is basically an inverse function. इसलिए माइनस साइन लिखा वहाँ. Labor is demanded by the firm, and how much labor will be demanded? That much labor where the profit get maximized, and for profit maximization W by P must be equal to MPN. So first we have to draw the labor demand line, then I will draw the labor supply line, then the equality of demand and supply will determine the employment, and once we determine employment, then we determine the output from the production function. तो ये अलग अलग tool है. First we have to write, make a, in your notebook, write first for the demand for labor section, then we go for the supply, then we will determine the employment. First subheading is demand for labor. The classical economics assume that, ठीक है, जो भी लिखा है वो भी स्टेप वाइज आ जाएगा in between. The classical economics assume that employment of labor is determined by forces of demand and supply in the labor market. Forces of demand and supply in the labor market. The classical economics assume that employment of labor is determined by forces of demand and supply in the labor market. Forces of demand and supply in the labor market. So the main feature of classical labor market economics, the main feature of classical labor market economics, the main feature of classical labor market economics is the assumption that the main feature of classical labor market economics is the assumption that labor market works well. Labor market works well. Labor market works well, and firms maximize their own profit. And firms maximize their own profit. Firms maximize their own profit. So it also assume that they have perfect information. they have perfect information. Perfect competition में perfect information assumption है. The new classical will change it. They will argue that information perfect नहीं होते हैं, but classical ने assume कर रखा है कि information perfect है.
ये वो डिफरेंस करता है ना प्योर कंपटीशन और परफेक्ट कंपटीशन में.
वो भी difference है, but that is also difference between the classical and the new classical. They have perfect information about all relevant prices. Perfect information about all relevant prices. All relevant prices. Full stop. In addition, they assume that. In addition, they assume that there are no barriers to adjustment of money wage. There are no adjustment. There are no barriers to. There are no barriers to adjustment of money wage. There are no barriers to adjustment of money wage. There are no barriers to adjustment of money wage, and market always clear. And market always clear. There are no barriers to adjustment of money wage and market always clear. Money wage के adjustment में कोई barrier नहीं. What could be the barrier? Barrier like minimum wage law होते, labor union का presence होता. We are assuming that no barrier, just labor demand and supply will always be in equilibrium. Flexibility of wage. Next paragraph. Labor is demanded by firms. Labor is demanded by firms. Labor is demanded by firms and competitive firm will. Labor is demanded by firms and competitive firm will. Competitive firm will always produce. Competitive firm will always produce that much output. Competitive firm will always produce that much output where its own profit get maximized. That much output where its own profit get maximized. Its own profit get maximized, which requires that MR is equal to MC. First equation, which requires that MR is equal to MC. Below that, in a competitive market, marginal revenue is equal to price. In a competitive market, MR is equal to price. So write this next equation. P equal to MC. पहले ये लिखिए, P equal to MC. So P is equal to MC. Now explain that marginal cost. The marginal labor cost is equal to nominal money wage divided by marginal product of labor. Nominal money wage divided by marginal product of labor. इक्वेशन पहले लिखिएगा. मार्जिनल कॉस्ट इज वेज अपॉन MPN. वो एग्जांपल लिख लेना सो दैट लेटर ऑन अगर आपको रिलेट करना हो. लाइक अगर मैंने MPN, इफ़ आई राइट दैट द MPN इज 4, तो ये 100 अपॉन 4 हो जाएगा, 25 पर यूनिट आ जाएगा. Therefore, at profit maximization, therefore at profit maximization, quantity of labor demanded by a firm is determined by equality of real wage and MPN. Equality of real wage, that is W by P, and MPN. Real wage and MPN. W by P equal to MPN. That is why MPN curve is called labor demand curve. 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 तो W अपॉन P को हमने इक्वेट किया विथ MPN. इन केस अगर कभी इक्वेशन में लिखा हो इस फॉर्मेट में P इंटू MPN, same thing can be written in this way. When you multiply the marginal product with the price, then this becomes value of marginal product, which will be equal to wage. W by P is a real wage and only W money wage. ये money है, nominal है. So this is written in nominal, this is written in real, this is written in real sense, and this is written in nominal sense. Nominal wage equal to VMP, real wage equal to MPN. Value of marginal product. Value of marginal product. Whenever you multiply any physical thing with the price, you get value of that. So marginal product multiplied by price is VMP. Clear? So when you draw the demand curve, it is basically the MPN curve. When I write the MPN, on axis you write W by P, and if you draw the VMP, if I write here VMP means what I have written, P into MPN, then I will write here only W. ठीक है? This is one side of the market which is labor demand. MPN curve is demand curve for labor because it is a real analysis. Classical is a real, so generally we will use more real description. So this is for the demand side, for the labor. Now if you go to the other side of the labor market, which is supply side, who supplies labor? Who is supplying labor? Labor will be supplied by the individual worker or household. How much labor they will supply? How much hour of labor they will supply? Their objective is, जैसे फर्म का ऑब्जेक्टिव है प्रॉफिट मैक्सिमाइज करना, वैसे वर्कर का ऑब्जेक्टिव क्या है? व्हाट इज ऑब्जेक्टिव ऑफ वर्कर देन? ऑब्जेक्टिव ऑफ वर्कर इज टू मैक्सिमाइज देयर ओन यूटिलिटी, एंड दे गेट यूटिलिटी फ्रॉम इनकम as well as not working, leisure. Even when you give more and more wage, the worker will not work 24 hours because leisure has its own utility. So utility depend upon the income as well as on the leisure. So the second side of the market, which is a supply of labor. So यहाँ तक जो पढ़ रहे हैं ना, ये जस्ट अंडरस्टैंड करने के लिए, अभी सब आंसर में रेयरली कभी यूज़ होना है, but to understand the model it is important. So labor will be supplied by the household and household is interested in maximizing utility, and utility depend upon two things. One is the income and second is from leisure or not working. Leisure or not working. ठीक है, जिससे ज़रा इक्वेशन के फॉर्मेट में समझे. जस्ट आई एम ड्राइंग वन, द अदर. On axis I am writing here leisure, that is not working, but on right side I will take hour of work. All are measured in terms of hour, not one worker, two worker. It is 1 hour or 2 hour. So if I mark here 24, that is the total number of hour we all have. Now out of that 24 hour we will use it for work and we will use it for leisure. If I mark any point here, like if I write here 8, how to read it? 8 का मतलब 8 क्या मेजर करना है? एक्सेस पे क्या लिखा है? लेजर. सो 8 आवर लेजर, रिमेनिंग 16 वर्क. इफ यू मार्क here 16 आवर लेजर, रिमेनिंग 8 वर्क होता है. सो इफ आई राइट 0, देन 0 लेजर हो गया, ऑल 24 आवर. So by working all 24 hour you can earn a maximum income here. If by working 24 hour you get 2400 money income, so what is the wage rate then? By working 24 hour you get 2400, that means per hour you get 100 rupees. If you connect these two, 2400 with 24, this is the budget constraint. And what is slope of line? 100, which is wage rate. So right side I am writing that wage rate of 100. Now question is, given this budget constraint, what will be the number of working hour? It depend upon the utility. For utility, person will try to maximize the utility. Utility represented by the indifference curve. Indifference curve shows different combination where utility remain same, but on higher indifference curve utility is higher. So actually there are many indifference curve here. This is the maximizing utility. So if at the maximizing utility I mark a number here and write 10, what does it mean now? 10 hour of leisure and 14 hour for. So at this wage rate, person is working for 14 hour. I can mark here 14. I get 1 point here. ध्यान से क्या? If wage rate instead of 100, if it is 200, then right now we have considered wage of 100. I am saying now consider it 200. So that 24 hour will not change, that will remain same. But now if you work for 24 hour, you will get 4800. So you will have a higher intercept now. This higher intercept will be connected with this 24. Now my question is, if wage rate increases, what will be the effect on work? वर्किंग आवर में क्या इफेक्ट होगा वेज रेट के चेंज होने पे? यहाँ पे थोड़ा सा माइक्रो आपको यूज़ कर लेना. When wage rate will change, work will change because of two reasons: substitution effect and income effect. So first understand this. When wage rate higher, leisure becomes expensive. Leisure becomes, in what way? Leisure is wage rate is opportunity cost of leisure. If wage rate is 100 and you are not working, you are sacrificing 100. But if wage rate is 200 and then you are not working, you are sacrificing. So at high wage rate, leisure becomes expensive. So when leisure will become expensive, I will prefer to have less leisure and more. So due to substitution effect, at higher wage rate, person will work more. So because of substitution effect, work will rise. Now come to the income effect. As wage rate is higher and you are working more, with high wage rate, if we work more, the income will be higher. And at higher income, we will prefer to have, more of leisure, because leisure is considered as normal good. Work is considered as inferior. We work because through work we get income. It is not preference of work, it is preference for the income. It is preference for the income. So at high wage rate, when we work more, our income increases, and with more of income we prefer to have more of, but we can have more of leisure only when we work less. So due to income effect, person will prefer to work less. So what is the overall effect? Depend करता है, it may be more, it may be less, depending upon whether substitution effect is greater or income effect is greater. तो पर्सन के अगर आप ड्रॉ करते हैं तो नॉर्मली फॉर वन पर्सन लेबर सप्लाई का बेंडिंग बैकवर्ड होता है, बैकवर्ड बेंडिंग होता है, इन द सेंस अप टू अ वेज आई विल वर्क मोर, बट बियॉन्ड अ वेज आई विल वर्क less. So that is labor supply का bending backward. That is for one person. But here we are studying the macroeconomics. So in macro we are simply assuming that substitution effect is greater and worker is working more. तो ये left की तरफ मैंने ड्रॉ किया. Supply of labor will be less, work will be more. Connecting these you get labor सप्लाई, यहाँ से लेबर का सप्लाई लाएंगे. अब ये आर्गुमेंट जस्ट कंसीडर करना है, इसको बहुत ज़्यादा प्रोमिनेंस नहीं देना आपको अपने आंसर के अंदर. सिंपली यू विल राइट वन लाइन दैट अज्यूमिंग सब्स्टिट्यूशन इफेक्ट मोर देन द इनकम इफेक्ट, पर्सन विल प्रेफर टू हैव मोर ऑफ, पर्सन विल प्रेफर टू वर्क more at a higher wage rate. So we have negative slope labor demand curve and positive slope labor supply curve. ठीक है, पहले ये डायग्राम ड्रॉ करें. The both effect actually determine whether you will work more or whether you will work less. Income effect कहता है कि as we work more at higher wage rate, as our income increases, then with more of income I will when you determine normal commodity or inferior commodity, तो inferior goods का income के साथ क्या relation होगा? Inverse relation होता है. तो out of leisure and work, what is normal and what is inferior? Work is considered as inferior. So as income increases, work will decrease. So work is decreasing because of income effect. With more of income, I prefer to have more of leisure and less of work. So micro interpretation है, we consider work as inferior good. Therefore, with higher income effect, with higher income, there will be less of work due to income. But due to substitution, I will prefer to work more. That is why labor demand supply curve is backward bending, because of this ambiguity.
सर ये जो अपन ने 2400 से 4800 पर करा, ये मूवमेंट है, मूवमेंट है लागत,
ये बजट कंस्ट्रेंट है, रोटेट हो गया.
अच्छा,
रोटेशन ऑफ बजट लाइन. Up to this is basically the tool. मतलब there is a rare chance that you will be using up to this in any particular answer. इसके बाद जो लिखेंगे वो हमारा आंसर होगा. That will be used as a part of the answer. But to explain that, we will be using this supply and demand. Plus one more thing, when we draw the labor supply curve, remember labor supply depend also upon the wage. But if I ask which wage, after tax wage or before tax wage? After tax wage or before tax wage? What induces you to work more, after tax wage or before tax wage? If I say income tax rate is 100%, what is the meaning of that? Whatever income you will earn, 100% will be given as tax. So whether you will work or not? No. So actually we are concerned with after tax wage, not with the before tax wage. So tax will also affect this line. Income tax will also affect this line. When income tax increases, after tax wage decreases. So I will prefer to work less, means it will shift to the left. ये जो लाइन आपने बना रखी है, it is based upon a given income tax rate. If it goes up, it will shift to the right, it to the left. and if income tax decreases it will shift to the right or downward. ठीक है, वो पॉइंट लेटर ऑन आएगा. I write down this below this. इनकम टैक्स का वो डीमेरिट होता है. इनकम टैक्स ऑलवेज डिस्करेजेस वर्कर टू वर्क लेस. हायर इनकम टैक्स डिस्करेजेस, वो लोअर इनकम टैक्स विल इनकरेज देम टू वर्क मोर. Right below the diagram. Labor services are supplied by labor services are supplied by labor services are supplied by individual workers. Labor services are supplied by individual workers. Individual workers. So classical economics assume that classical economics assume that individuals attempt to maximize utility. Individuals attempt to maximize utility, and utility depends positively on individuals attempt to maximize utility, and utility depends positively on real income and leisure. Real income and leisure. Real income and leisure. Full stop. Assuming that substitution effect dominate over income effect. Assuming that substitution effect dominate over income effect. Substitution effect dominate over income effect. We get positively sloped labor supply curve. We get positively sloped labor supply curve. Positively sloped labor supply curve. Positively sloped labor supply curve. So we have a positive slope labor supply curve, negative slope labor demand curve. So this is up to this we have covered the tools, in the sense this is your labor supply line, this is your labor demand curve, and above one was the production function. Now combining all, we can mark the major point here, which is called determination of employment and output. Employment and output. Determination of employment and output. See what we have explained so far. We have written the production function here, y as a function of capital and employment of labor. So I will draw 1 as the production function. From that function we can draw the labor demand, and now I will derive aggregate supply curve also. Vertical line. Mark the axis first. First diagram is for the production function. So what I will write on the axis? Yn and keeping k constant. So first draw the production function line. फ्री हैंड ड्रॉ कर देगा बस स्लोप को डिक्रीज करते हुए. So it is y as a function of capital and employment of labor, where capital is constant. From that production function you derive a labor demand curve which is negatively sloped. Labor demand curve is which line?
MPN.
So labor demand is MPN. And then we have derived the labor supply positive slope. Labor demand is a function of W by P but negative. Labor supply is also a function of W by P but it is positive. And we are studying classical labor market which require that labor supply is always equal to labor demand, and if they are not equal then what will happen? If labor demand and supply are not equal then what will happen? Wage will change. Wage flexible है, तो इस assumption को follow करते हुए description दे रहे हैं. So in the first you have drawn the function, then labor demand, labor supply, their equality will determine full employment. This is called full employment. Full employment is that labor employed which is existing at equality of labor demand and labor supply. So once you determine the employment will determine the output according to which curve? According to the function. Y is a function of n. So once you determine n, then you determine the output. This output will be called as full employment output. And this equality will also determine the real wage. Real wage is W1 by P1. W1 by P1. Now in that third diagram, we will derive AS, aggregate supply curve, classical AS, which is the first tool. Whenever you draw AS or AD on axis, what you will write? On axis I will take price and output, P और Y. आप AS बनाओ या AD बनाओ, एक्सेस पे क्या लेना है? प्राइस और आउटपुट के बीच का रिलेशन होता है. सो व्हाट इज द प्राइस हियर? P1. So it is a given number. So I can mark that P1 here. How much is the output? YF. So YF is also a given number. You can mark that YF also. Suppose this distance is 200. So I will mark that 200 here. So you have a given output YF at a given price P1. So P1 and YF just connected to get 1 point. P1 and YF connected to get 1 point. And just now recall what is the meaning of the term classical dichotomy. I said what is the meaning of classical dichotomy? No relation between real and nominal. Change in nominal will affect other nominal but not any real. Change in nominal will affect another nominal but not any real. So out of these two variables, one is price, other is output. Which one is real and which one is nominal? Y real है, price तो प्राइस चेंज होगा तो नॉमिनल चेंज हुआ, नॉमिनल का रियल पे कोई इफेक्ट नहीं होना चाहिए. सो इफ आई टेक अ डिफरेंट प्राइस, सपोज आई कंसीडर अ हायर प्राइस P2, ध्यान से किया डायग्राम पे, जस्ट वेट हियर. इफ आई कंसीडर अ हायर प्राइस P2, then what will be the impact on this diagram? If you consider a higher price P2, then with given nominal wage, as price goes up, the real wage will fall. Now if you take any real wage lower than that, the labor market is no longer in equilibrium. In fact, labor supply is less and labor demand is more. So as price goes up, the real wage decreases and labor market will not in equilibrium. And we are following a classical model which say that labor market के अंदर full employment होना है हमेशा, and it is guaranteed by what? Flexibility of wage. So what will change now because of more demand for labor? Because of more demand for labor, the wage will increase. So what happens that as price goes up from P1 to P2, nominal wage will also rise from W1 to, so that the real wage will remain same. तो अगर real same रह गया, तो real same रह गया, that means the employment will remain same. When employment will remain same, then output will remain same. So although we have a higher price, but output will remain same. So you get next point here. You can repeat it for the third price. And by connecting all those points, by connecting all those dots, you get vertical classical aggregate supply curve. That is a classical aggregate supply curve, which is a vertical line. Classical AS is a vertical line. So you derive classical AS from the production function and labor demand and labor supply description. यहाँ से आपको ये बेसिकली डिराइव किया जाता है. मतलब दिस पॉइंट ऑल्सो शोज क्लासिकल डायकॉटमी दैट चेंज इन द प्राइस हैज नॉट अफेक्टेड द रियल वेरिएबल लाइक आउटपुट. लिमिटेड पॉइंट यहाँ से भी एक्सप्लेन हो जाए. बट ऑल्दो वी रिक्वायर मोर टूल टू एक्सप्लेन. ADS है, AD है, लोनेबल फंड थ्योरी ऑफ इंटरेस्ट रेट है. So just I repeat, when the function when you are deriving it, when you change the price from P1 to P2 with the given nominal wage, as price goes up the real wage decreases. At any real wage lower than equilibrium, the labor market will no longer be in equilibrium. So with more demand for labor, wage will start rising and wage will adjust immediately, so that labor market is always in equilibrium, and therefore output will remain same, employment will remain same. Only the nominal wage will go up in the same proportion in which price has increased. अब ये फॉर्म बेसिकली वहाँ पे आप लिखते हैं तो बेसिकली यू हैव टू अप्लाई इन दिस वे. क्लासिकल एएस का डेरिवेशन है. बट व्हेन यू एक्सप्लेन दिस क्लासिकल एएस डेरिवेशन, देन नेक्स्ट व्हाट यू हैव टू एक्सप्लेन इन दिस पार्ट आफ्टर एक्सप्लेनिंग द डेरिवेशन कि कैन दिस एएस चेंज. क्या आउटपुट चेंज हो सकता है क्लासिकल मॉडल में? Yes, it can, because entire AS has been derived based upon some assumption. Assumption number 1 is that capital is fixed, technology is fixed. So if capital or technology will change, then the function will shift. As function will shift, same labor can produce more of the output, the AS will also shift. So the chapter number 3 explain that what are the factors that affect the output, and at the same time it also explain what are the factors that will not affect the output. तो ये काफ़ी डिटेल है. मतलब कौन कौन से फैक्टर जिससे आउटपुट चेंज होगा एंड व्हाट आर द फैक्टर दैट विल नॉट अफेक्ट द आउटपुट. सो फैक्टर्स अफेक्टिंग द आउटपुट इज वन पार्ट, फैक्टर्स डू नॉट अफेक्टिंग द आउटपुट इज द अदर पार्ट. प्लस when you see the question, it is not always necessary. just इस context में क्वेश्चन जरा अप्लाई कर लीजिए. just you can refer to this. ये क्वेश्चन 2017 आई गेस 17 में. क्वेश्चन नंबर 54. let's read this question. Explain how equilibrium employment and real wage would change in a typical classical model in the event of increase in supply of labor. Money wage becomes rigid. That means question is saying that money wage is rigid and supply of labor increases. In how it will affect the employment and the output in the typical classical मॉडल. क्लासिकल मॉडल में क्या होगा? अब क्लासिकल मॉडल में अगर मैं इस क्वेश्चन को एक्सप्लेन करना कि व्हाट विल हैपन इन द क्लासिकल मॉडल. सो इन द क्लासिकल मॉडल मीन्स यू कैन जस्ट यूज दिस डिस्क्रिप्शन. ठीक है, अभी ड्रॉ नहीं करना इसको, नेक्स्ट विल बी कवरिंग इट. फंक्शन ड्रॉ किया, लेबर डिमांड, लेबर सप्लाई और वहाँ से एग्रीगेट सप्लाई लाइन. तो पहली बात ये फंक्शन ड्रॉ हुआ, लेबर का डिमांड ड्रॉ कर दिया, लेबर का सप्लाई और एएस की लाइन. क्लासिकल मॉडल में व्हेन यू ड्रॉ द एडी नेक्स्ट, तो क्लासिकल एडी इज आल्सो ड्रॉन इन दिस वे. इंटरसेक्शन से एक्चुअल में प्राइस आएगा और जो एडी क्लासिकल का मॉडल का होगा वो मनी के ऊपर बेस्ड होता है. इट बेस्ड अपॉन अ क्वांटिटी ऑफ मनी. सो क्वेश्चन में ये कहा जा रहा है कि इफ़ देयर इज़ अ इंक्रीज इन द लेबर सप्लाई, if there is increase in the labor supply, so if there is increase in the labor supply means which curve shifts? The labor supply will shift to the right. So if labor supply will shift to the right, then what will be the impact in the typical classical model classically लेना है. So what will be the impact in the model if labor supply increases? Then ये curve shift हो गया right side. So generally you will think that okay, equilibrium point is this. इक्विलिब्रियम पॉइंट का मतलब क्या, W1 और P1 की वैल्यू कम होगी, एम्प्लॉयमेंट बढ़ जाएगा और आउटपुट बढ़ जाएगा, बट दैट विल बी कंप्लीटली रॉन्ग, because if you change this W or P, question say that nominal wage is rigid, you can't change that. So can W by P decrease because of change in price? Price will also not change, because classical model का price किससे determine होगा, money से determine होगा. जब तक AD नहीं change होगा price change नहीं होगा, और AD will change only because of money. वो next में explain हो जाएगा next lecture में. Money will affect only the price. If there will be no change in money, no change in the price, because AD will determine the price. So if you cannot change W, you cannot change P, then W1 by P1 will remain same. If that will remain same, then there will be a gap between these two. That labor demand and supply is not equal, then demand and supply की equality नहीं होगी अब. In fact, labor supply will be more and demand will be less, and there will be unemployment in the labor market. Now question, why you are getting unemployment in the classical model? Because explain तो classical model पढ़ रहे हैं, classical model तो पढ़ रहे हैं, but हमने assumption कौन सा ले लिया, wage की rigidity है, which is the assumption of. तो if you follow the Keynesian assumption, you will get the Keynesian conclusion. If you follow the classical model, you get the classical conclusion. So the question was referring to the classical model, but question has taken Keynesian assumption. So that type of applied question you can expect. It's not always the straight question ki explain the classical model. The question is referring to the classical model, but smart chain question ने क्या कर दिया, money wage को rigid कर दिया, which is an assumption of the Keynesian model. So we are using the model here, we have to explain the complete model here. We will explain the classical AS, classical AD, and then we will elaborate. The purpose of showing this question at this point of time is that it is not necessarily always a straight question from the macro. It will maybe a straight question, maybe a applied question in this way also. ये दो अलग अलग फॉर्मेट में क्वेश्चन है, सिर्फ यहाँ तक का ये डिस्क्रिप्शन करके इसको छोड़ देना. Determination of employment, just draw this diagram. We will start with description of this diagram, then what are the factors that will affect output in the classical model, next what are the factors that will not affect output in the classical model, then that question of 2017, and then chapter number 4. यहाँ तक जो पढ़ा वो बेसिकली चैप्टर नंबर 3 के अंदर है, इंक्लूडिंग द रिमेनिंग पार्ट. सो अगेन आई रिपीट, द पर्पस ऑफ चैप्टर इज बेसिकली टू इलाबोरेट द कंसेप्ट. वो कंसेप्ट इलाबोरेटेड है वहाँ पे चैप्टर. वी आर ट्राइंग टू कन्वर्ट दैट इन दिस so that you can make an answer out of this. So initial part like production function, you have to just understand it. The labor demand, labor supply curve also you have to just understand it. The main question will start from this description. यहाँ से start. Most of the question you will be using this diagram in the classical model. ठीक है, classical के लिए यहाँ से करना.
सर उसमें अपन ने P constant कैसे करा? W तो
दिया हुआ, but in the classical model our price can change only because of AD change. But AD in classical is derived by quantity theory of money. ये next में clear हो जाएगा next class में. Quantity theory of money, unless money will not change, AD will not change, and unless AD will not change, price will not change. Money हाँ money supply. ठीक है, तो we'll start from this description. यहाँ तक ये डायग्राम करके रख देना. We'll start from this. For if you want to read chapter, study material में uploaded है, you can refer it, but although बहुत requirement नहीं, जो क्लास का कंटेंट आप करेंगे वो exhaustive रहेगा, so that you even if you are not referring to that book, no problem with that. जो additional point होगा वो भी in fact ऐड कर रहे हैं. ठीक है.